Hello and welcome to the Grandfather's Cave. In this video I'm going to walk you through a couple of simple steps that will improve your maps dramatically. In a recent video I presented the original 1985 adventure module Castle Caldwell and Beyond. As I mentioned, that module had been heavily criticized, and with a few simple steps I showed you how you can improve on that and make it a really good adventure. In this video we're delving further into Castle Caldwell and we are revisiting the Dungeons of Terror. That is, the cellars underneath Castle Caldwell. But before we delve into this dungeon, if you're new to this channel or you have not done so already, subscribe to this channel and press the notification bell so you don't miss any of the future videos. And now, let's roll initiative and let's get started. As I mentioned in a previous video, the two basic steps that I use when refurbishing and modernizing these adventures is 1. To redraw the map, and 2. To reimagine the contents of the dungeon. To start with, let's look at the idea behind this dungeon. As it is presented, the adventurers are called back to Castle Caldwell by its owner and asked to investigate a dungeon underneath the castle. Clifton Caldwell, as he is called in the adventure, is the owner of Castle Caldwell and has hired a magic user to remove a magic barrier, thus permitting investigation of the dungeons underneath. This magic user has not wanted to examine the dungeon and has just departed. And when the player characters enter the dungeon, they are encountered by a doppelganger who will try to double-cross them when they are at their weakest. As the player characters proceed through this dungeon, they will encounter a couple of wizards who live in one of the first rooms. And connected to the room where the wizards live, the players will find 4 robber flies nesting in hollows in the wall. After this, the player characters will make their way through some empty corridors and empty rooms. And in one of these rooms, which is actually rather small and constricted, they will encounter a gelatinous cube. Venturing further, the player characters will come into a partially excavated part of the dungeon where they will encounter 4 berserkers. And in the last part of that unexcavated area, they will find the den of 3 thools, which are creatures that look like hobgoblins but have the paralyzing ability of a ghoul and the regenerative ability of a troll. This last encounter with the thools will reveal a key for the player characters that opens the door to a room with a teleporter that will take the players to a secret treasure vault guarded by 2 wights. The setup of this adventure does not allow the player characters to leave the dungeon before they have explored it in its entirety. Only by reaching the treasure vault will the player characters find the location of the secret door and the magical phrase that will open it and permit them to exit this dungeon. I find the encounters of this Dungeon of Terror to be rather disconnected. In my interpretation of the Dungeons of Terror, Clifton Caldwell, the owner of Castle Caldwell, has hired a magic user to remove the magic barriers blocking these lower levels. However, this magic user was not what she appeared to be. She was in fact the doppelganger, and instead of just leaving this doppelganger returned to the dungeon in order to abscond with the treasures within. This doppelganger has realized that the Dungeons of Terror are much more dangerous than first presumed. In my interpretation, the 2 wizards, the berserkers and the thools are all part of the same group. A group of degenerate, savage and cannibalistic humans living in secret under the castle. They have a secret passage that leads into the forest where they hunt animals, goblins and humans to drag into the dungeon and feast upon. Instead of clean undescript corridors and rooms, the Dungeons of Terror are filled with the remains of these victims. Thus, in most areas of this dungeon, the player characters will find bones, skulls and other remains of creatures that have been dragged here and killed. As a GM, you should underscore the gruesome carnage that has taken place in this area. While I considered connecting Area 1 to Area 9, I thought that might be a bit too dangerous for the player characters, since they might become overwhelmed by the inhabitants of this dungeon before even starting the adventure. Thus, I did not do that. However, instead of having a long corridor connecting areas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, I interspersed some stairs. Thus, the player characters will gradually descend deeper and deeper into the dungeon and therefore have a sense of growing danger. In Room 1, I let the player characters encounter the doppelganger as described in the adventure. The doppelganger will pose as the wizard that removed the magic barrier and will offer to travel with the player characters. She will still attempt to betray and backstab the player characters at an opportune moment. In Room 2, instead of just having 2 solitary wizards, these wizards are instead crazed mystics connected to a cult of Caldwell, the god of savagery and slaughter. They will at first seem like harmless old men, but any social interaction with them will reveal that they are insane and they will not be able to keep up their facade and will attack the player characters. Room 2 and 3 were originally connected. I have maintained part of this connection but I have introduced a difference of elevation, creating a partial partition between the two rooms. And in this version of the dungeon, the two wizards have erected some nets in order to keep the robber flies of Area 3 out of their laboratory. Already in this encounter with the crazed mystics, it is important that the game master underscores the sense of dread and madness in this dungeon. Moving down further stairs that are filled with bones and debris, the player characters reach a door in the northern wall. This is an unexcavated area that is inhabited by robber flies, and there are some ventilation ducts that permit the robber flies to exit this complex. As a GM, you should try to discourage the player characters from exiting this area through these ducts, but I think it is reasonable that a sufficiently skilled climber of small size would be able to exit this way. Venturing further down the corridor filled with bone and debris, they reach Area 4. As I see this is a room that has been filled with junk and remains of the victims of the cult. There's nothing of interest here, but again, the GM should play up the grisliness and the gore of the dungeon. Room 5 is still the sepultation room and is still locked. However, there should be warnings written on the door. These should be written in a crude manner, carved in with claws or daggers, and possibly with the letters filled with blood. I have removed the odd teleportation mechanism that was originally here and have instead placed a daze. Anyone stepping upon it will automatically be teleported into room 14, but this room should not be accessible until the player characters find the key. As I see it, one of the members of the cult stepped upon the teleporter and disappeared, and the others thought that their comrade had been instantly slain, and thus declared this room taboo, permanently sealing it off. Room 6 was a large empty room. In my version of this dungeon, this room is accessed by a large stone double door. The area beyond have been left undisturbed by the savages of this dungeon, as they fear the creature that dwells within. Entering this first room, room number 6, they discover the area abandoned. Even though there's a skylight with water dripping through tiny grates 60 feet above, there is not as much as a speck of dirt or a small puddle of water in here. And in the opposite end of the room, in the western side, the door has disappeared. Examining this closer reveals that there are some hinges and nails, as well as an abandoned lock, but the door has disappeared. There are also some reliefs on the western wall that depict the construction of Castle Caldwell and how its builders created a treasure room underneath the castle. Of course, this relief does not reveal the exact location of this treasure room. The opening in the western wall of room 6 leads into a long corridor, and just like area 6, this area is completely clean, with not as much as a speck of dust. The north wall of this corridor has 2 openings, with the doors missing as well. Investigation reveals hinges, nails, and locks, and in the rooms, the player characters will find even more nails, the iron bands of barrels, and other metallic items scattered on the floor. These were storage rooms, where the original owners of Castle Caldwell kept extra castle supplies. However, at some point of time, a gelatinous cube has entered this area through the grates in area 6, and the gelatinous cubes wanders these corridors, digesting whatever organic material it can find. It is likely that the player characters will be surprised by the gelatinous cube, which at this level should pose a great danger to the player characters. As you can see, I have also removed the door to area 9, and the reason for this I will explain in a moment. If we return to the central corridor, where the stone doors for area 6 were, you can see that I have also removed the secret door and added a double door. Just like the door to area 5, this door has been locked by the savage inhabitants of this room. This is because this door leads to the outside. Walking beyond this door leads the player characters to a portcullis that can be raised easily from within. And while the corridor and stairs beyond this double door is a macabre scene filled with bones and debris, the fresh air here should give the player characters hope of freedom. If we return to the central corridor, we can see that instead of just ending blindly, I have made it so that it ends with a stair. It should be obvious that there was some excavation going on, but that beyond the stair, no further construction was completed. In this version of the Dungeons of Terror, this stair has become a refuse pit filled with bones and cadavers. You should feel free to play up the stench of death and add a host of flies hovering over the pit. Instead of having the entrance to this half-constructed area in area 9, I have placed it in area 10. The double door leads into a communal area. This area should hold whatever items you think are necessary for the band of savages to survive. I have added furs, some baskets and pots full of supplies and water, a fire pit with a boiling cauldron, and a stone wheel for the sharpening of blades. In the next door area, you will still find the berserkers. These, of course, are savage followers of the cult of Marko. I play these up to be degenerate inbreds, like the ones you will see in movies like The Hills Have Eyes. As soon as they detect the player characters, they will rush forward and fight in savage glee until either they or all the player characters have been killed. The next room that was was originally Area 10 and inhabited by the Berserkers, I have flooded with a pool, filled it with stalagmites and stalactites, and lit the entrance with a couple of torches. And in the middle of the pool there's an old altar. This altar, of course, will be recognizable by anyone schooled in mysticism as an altar dedicated to Cald, and should thus make it obvious for the players what is going on in this area. The next room, room 11, I have maintained much as it was before, but I have added the undisturbed corpses and bones of trespassers as a warning. Thus the player characters should be able to figure out that there's a trap in place before they find the chest buried in the rubble. As I see this, the leaders of the cult have a treasure room here, and the corpses in this corridor belong to lower ranked cultists that have attempted to pilfer the treasure of their masters. Or maybe I should say mistresses, because in the last room the player characters will find the 3 fools. These I have reskinned to become human mutants. In my reimagining of this dungeon, these fools are the 3 matriarchs of the cult. They are by far toughest and most savage members of the cult, and both the Berserkers of Area 9 and the Wizards of Area 2 are their willing thralls. I have not changed their stats, and thus these 3 matriarchs will attack with their bare hands. Their fingers end in jagged claws that can paralyze their opponents, and they have the regenerative ability of a Thule, which is a weakened version of the regenerative power of a troll. The strongest of these matriarchs holds the keys to Area 5 and to exit Area 15. I think it's a good idea to give the players an option to leave this dungeon at this point. The players and their characters have likely experienced sufficient feelings of dread by this point, but if they still feel brave or lucky, they may want to keep exploring the dungeon. At this point, the only area they will not have reached is Area 5, and entering Area 5 they'll be able to teleport into Area 14. I have made no changes to Area 14, except that I have placed a very obvious teleporting dais in the middle of the room. This room is extremely dangerous, as it is home to 2 wights, and an attack by a wight is very likely to kill a level 1 character due to their innate drain ability. This is one of the reasons why I think it's important to give the players an option to leave the dungeon when they have defeated the cult matriarchs. This chamber, of course, is the treasure vault of Castle Caldwell. Instead of just having 10 coffins in this room, I think that you should make 8 of these coffins into stone treasure chests, about the same size as stone sarcophagi. The 2 remaining coffins should be stone sarcophagi. Close examination should reveal remains of paint on their lids, and thus careful and particularly discerning players will be able to figure out that these 2 sarcophagi might pose a particular danger. I hope you like the way I reworked the Dungeon of Terror, the level underneath Castle Caldwell. As you can see, I have not changed the treasures or the creatures within, but I have changed their relationship and their placement in the dungeon. I have also done some refurbishing of the map, adding furniture and moving doors in a way that I think makes more sense than the original layout of the dungeon. And while I like the idea of the player characters being trapped down here, I also think that we should give them an option to exit when they have completed the main goal, and thus I leave the teleporter in place for player characters who want to push their luck and examine a bit further. The map that I have created for this video, I have made in Dungeon Scroll, and I will leave a link for the map file in the description of this video, as well as statistics for these monsters usable with the Avern Fantasy RPG. If you enjoyed this video and found its content useful, press the like button and leave a comment. Is there something you like in particular, or something you would have done different? And if you have not done so already, subscribe and press the notification bell so that you don't miss any future content. Until next time, keep slaying.